4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, welcome to our brilliant and astute audience. Welcome to Wartime America. Here we are, bogged down in a war. We're hitting its fourth week with no particular end in sight. We are bogged down in precisely the kind of war that Trump said he would never get us involved in, and was one of the principal arguments he made for electing him to a second non-consecutive term in 2024. The American people should have known you cannot trust anything that Donald Trump says. He simply fabricates whatever he believes is in his interest. And it's an alternative reality that has nothing to do with truth.
But there is some good news.
Good news.
Yes, your book, Dad.
My book right here.
Conservative at the Core has been nominated for a finalist for Indie's Book of the Year in history, Dad. Pretty
Wow.
cool.
Indies, that's independent publishing.
Right.
Like university presses. My book was published by the University of Notre Dame Press, and it is one of very few books that Indies has nominated as a finalist for their Book of the Year award in history. And as always said, the critical thing is to be a finalist. That's the great honor. You never know if you're going to win or not, because, you know, that's kind of very chancy. But I'm very proud to have been so nominated.
You should be proud.
Yeah.
Now back to the bad news.
Oh, God.
Well, this could be good news. It could be bad news. We're not really sure. Let's get into it. How about that?
That's a good idea.
President Donald Trump said negotiations with Iranian officials were continuing and that, quote, they want to make a deal, unquote, and that he received a present from Tehran. Iran, meanwhile, has insisted that no talks have taken place. What's going on here, Dad?
How in the world could anyone possibly know?
These are not, two straight shooters, the Iranian Ayatollah regime and Donald Trump, two people, figures, regimes known for lying. So
known for lying and known for being totally self-serving. So
right.
No one has the faintest idea what is really going on. On the one hand, Donald Trump tells us the war is over.
Right.
We've already won it. It's done. On the other hand, who is he sending to the Middle East?
Marines,
airborne troops. You know, if the war is already won, why in the world are you sending ground troops to the Middle East? And does Israel think the war has won?
No, it doesn't seem so.
Not even close. And we're beginning to understand, while I think Donald Trump was played initially by Netanyahu, we're beginning to understand how the interests of Netanyahu and Trump, who are kindred spirits, both extreme right-wingers. Netanyahu is Trump's man in Israel, make no mistake about it. But the interests of the two nations are beginning to diverge. Iran, in terms of Israel, they want to do to Iran what they did to Gaza. What did they do to Gaza, Sam?
Really bad stuff.
Yes, that's what they obliterated it. Really did. That's what they want to do to Iran. Destroy as much of Iran as possible. And just as they couldn't have cared less how many people they killed in Gaza, they couldn't care less how many people they kill in Iran. They just want to rain as much death and destruction on Iran as possible to kind of eliminate it as a major power in the Middle East, in the backyard of Israel. That is not necessarily the objective of the United States, although it seems to be the objective of, our blood and guts Pete Hegseth, who seems to think the way you measure victory in war is by death and destruction. And instead of lamenting that the way our truly great military leaders like Dwight Eisenhower or going back to George Washington did, the sadness of people dying in the war, Hegseth revels in it, takes pleasure in death and destruction. It couldn't be sadder. Now, I want to refer you to the source, the historical source that is widely regarded as the most insightful source on warfare. The Chinese master Sun Tzu. And he said, the way you win a war, Sam, and the best way you win a war is to win before the fighting even begins.
Right.
To get the adversary to agree to your terms without death and destruction. And Donald Trump and Netanyahu totally have disregarded that incredibly sage advice.
Kiko was scratching
And
at the door.
what does winning mean? The goal is not to destroy the enemy, but to capture the enemy's kingdom intact rather
Intact.
than destroying it. I'll repeat that.
Repeat it.
The goal is to capture the enemy's kingdom intact rather than destroy it. If you destroy it, you have subverted any hope to actually win a war and gain benefit from the war. If you cannot end the war before it starts, which is the most desirable option that Trump abandoned,
Right.
in two ways. One, remember, we had a working agreement
Oh, yeah.
way back in 2015.
Oh,
Who was
yeah.
president then, Sam?
2015.
Yeah.
Oh,
Barack Obama. It was working. Yes, it wasn't turning Iran into, a pro-American democratic state, and neither is this war, but leave that aside. It had one purpose and one purpose only. And what was that, Sam?
It wasn't listening.
To stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And it was working. Trump's own administration, his own experts in that field verified that the agreement was working. And then Trump tore it up for no other reason than I could fathom, that he wanted to destroy anything with Barack Obama's name on it. And what did he promise almost 10 years ago, 18 years, 8 years ago?
Much better deal.
Much better deal. And what kind of deal has he gotten after 8 years?
A war.
Yes, exactly. We got a war contrary to all the wise prescriptions of the master of warfare, Sun Tzu. That's exactly what we got. And then there were negotiations taking place a month ago, right, Sam?
Right.
And what did Trump do? He stopped the negotiations and started a war, contradicting the most fundamental aim of dealing with your enemy, which is to get what you want without a war. Unless you're Pete Hegseth and you revel in death and destruction, contrary to what all our greatest military leaders have professed. There are so many wonderful quotations from George Washington, how much he laments the loss of life and how much he laments the destruction. He talks about one of the cruel British leaders, and he says, this cruelty will not do them any good, and in the end, it will do them more harm than good. This is George Washington, the father of our country, and we're heading towards the 250th anniversary. Wise, effective warriors understand, as Sun Tzu points out, the goal of war is not mere death and destruction. If you go to war, he says, he defines winning as strategy. Strategy, Sam, not tactics, using deception, alliances, and disruption of the enemy's plan. Alliances. Remember, what was our one successful war in the Middle East under George H.W. Bush?
The Gulf War?
The Gulf War, where we effectively dislodged Saddam Hussein from taking control over Kuwait. a strategically important, although small, country. But what did Kuwait have in abundance that
Oil.
made it important? Oil. Very successful. And what didn't we do after we knocked Saddam out of Kuwait? We didn't roll the tanks to Baghdad. We did not prolong the war. We did not try to take over the country. We followed Colin Powell back then, his Pottery Barn analogy. If you break it, you own it. So and George Bush built a coalition, an alliance of dozens of countries, including Arab countries, including hostile countries, following Sun Tzu's prescription that you win a war with alliances. What kind of alliance has Donald Trump built for this war?
Netanyahu, I guess.
Netanyahu, that's it. The worst actor you possibly could join with. Where are our allies? I'll tell you where our allies are. Our greatest allies, of course, are our NATO partners, right, Sam?
Right.
And one of our NATO partners is Germany.
Right.
One of our most important NATO partners, because it's the most strongest economy on the continent of Europe. There is a president of Germany. You don't hear much about him because the presidency is essentially a symbolic position. Same thing in Israel. But it's very important symbolically. Represents the head of state, not the head of government, which is the prime minister. Nobody knows who the president is, but as I said, it's very important for the Germans. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who can speak, according to the analysis that I found, more freely than politicians because he doesn't have a political role and doesn't have to suck up to Donald Trump. He said, and this is amazing, one of our allies, this is not the North Koreans, it's not the Russians, Sam, it's not the Chinese. Foreign policy does not become more convincing because we not call it a breach of international law when it is a breach of international law. We must address this with regard to the war in Iran. For my view, this war is contrary to international law, and it is a quote-unquote politically disastrous mistake. Just as I believe there'll be no going back in relations with Russia before February 24th, 2022, the attack on Ukraine, so do I believe there will be no going back. This is incredible. In transatlantic relations to before January 20th, 2025, before the war in Iran got going. An irreparable breach, he's predicting. This is the German president.
Wow.
In the international alliance that has kept the West safe since the end of World War II. This is just an astounding statement, calling the war a disastrous mistake, predicting an perhaps irreparable breach in transatlantic relations. This is truly frightening. And we still, Sun Tzu has defined what victory means. Has Donald Trump? Yeah, exactly. It deserves every bit of laughter, except if it wasn't so sad. We have not a clue what victory means. Does it mean just confiscating their enriched uranium? Does it mean you're getting another pledge not to build a nuclear weapon? Does it mean you destroy their entire military? Does it mean you install a brand new regime? Trump came up with something truly astonishing. He said, we really have regime change because we have new leaders. It's the same darn regime.
Right.
The leadership has changed, but it's exactly the same militant Islamic regime. So we have not a clue.
It's literally the son of the last leader.
Yeah, exactly.
You couldn't get more of a continuation of a regime if you tried.
All the people around him are equally hardline as much as the old leaders.
Right.
And as many has pointed out, and we've pointed this out many times.
Me and you, or just you?
Well, both of us.
Okay.
What would be the incentive for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon after this war? Would it decrease or increase?
Probably increase.
Yes, because they know what are the nations that the United States has never attacked.
Ones with nukes.
Ones with nukes, even though a nation like North Korea is vastly more threatening to the United States than Iran. It has nuclear weapons. It has long-range missiles. It has devoted itself to building a formidable war machine. But of course, we can't attack North Korea because they have nukes. So, the leaders of Iran, whatever you may think of them, they're not stupid. They know the only way to guarantee the safety of their country is, in fact, to build nuclear weapons. No pledge, no promise, no statement by Donald Trump is going to cut any water with them, because they know, as the poet T.S. Eliot said, decisions and revisions that a minute will reverse. You can't trust anything that Donald Trump tells you. As soon as his whim changes, his so-called policies are going to change. So we don't know if Trump is trying to buy time, to try to find an off-ramp that maybe will get oil prices down and stop the destruction of the economy that he has wrought to no purpose, or he's just trying to buy time to get the ground troops there to take over Karg Island, which is the oil facilities of Iran, or maybe to assault the capital. Who knows?
You want to know my theory?
Yes, of course.
He's trying to, there's this sort of spiritual way of saying putting things into existence. I think he's trying to put the reality of a peace deal into existence before it's even started, in order to make people think it's starting, maybe even to convince the Iranian regime that the next steps need to be a peace deal. It's like this, speak it into existence type strategy.
That's typical of Donald Trump, right?
Right.
It's like the old famous poem, the nonsense poem by Lewis Carroll, one of my favorites, The Hunting of the Snark. 'Twas thrilling, and the slithy toes that gyre and gimble in the wave, all mimsy while the bora grows. And the captain of the boat was famous for saying, he told everyone some nonsense, then he said, I've told you it once, I've told you it twice, and I've told you it 3 times. And anything I tell you 3 times is true. Trump seems to be guided by the utter nonsense of the hunting of the snark.
I think he's also just freaking out about the stock market, oil prices, and he's trying to decrease all the chaos around that as quick as possible. So he's trying to say, yeah, we're in the midst of peace deals, even though we're not, just so that hopefully the stock market recovers, and maybe he'll trick oil prices into recovering a little bit ahead of any real peace talks.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's going to work in the long run. But,
well, of course it won't work in the long run. But
and we've seen the stock market whipsaw, depending on his whim. One of my favorite books is The Exploration of the Blue and White Nile. And one of the explorers was talking about coming across a kingdom in Africa, where he said, in this particular kingdom, there is no law, there is no consistency. It's just the whim of the chief. Well, we've replicated that. There's no law in America anymore from Donald Trump. There's no consistency. There's only his whims.
Right. Our next topic. The Supreme Court appears likely to embrace a conservative challenge to tallying mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day, a move that could upend election procedures in states across the country as voters prepare to cast ballots in the midterm elections.
Another phantom. Chase a phantom. There is no evidence that ballots received after Election Day are fraudulent, are filled with problems. They are no different from any other ballots. And by the way,
BT dubs.
These ballots have to be mailed postmarked before Election Day.
Right.
So it's not as if anyone's voting after Election Day. It's just the ballots can sometimes be received a few days after. We're not talking about a month after. We're talking about like 3 to 5 days after. Absolutely no reason to overturn this, just as there is absolutely no reason except to restrict people's opportunities, to require people to show documentary proof of citizenship, since there is virtually no non-citizen voting in American elections. As I've said before, a non-citizen is more likely to be hit by lightning than to vote in an American election. No problem with having these ballots received a little bit after. But there is a big problem if you eliminate this grace period for no good reason, and that is voters become subject to the whim of the post office. And we know under the current leadership of the post office, it's been disastrous. They're even possibly talking about shutting down. Things are going so badly. Why in the world would you leave voters, legitimate voters, people have every right to vote, why would you leave them subject to the whim of the Postal Service? None of this makes any sense except as broadly part of a right-wing strategy to restrict voting as much as possible. And here's the great irony of this, Sam.
Let me guess. Donald Trump voted today by mail for the Florida
I don't think it was today,
elections.
but he voted by mail.
Right. The election was today.
Yeah. He voted by mail in advance of the election in his district that covers Mar-a-Lago, Sam, right?
Right.
And, of course, he said, mail-in balloting is horrible. We have to eliminate this. I don't believe is the first time he's voted by mail.
No. I think he's voted by mail, I think, in a bunch of the
I think
elections.
Typically he's voted by mail. As I said, Trump's whims, no law, no consistency, no logic, no truth. But here's the great thing that happened in this district that covers Mar-a-Lago that has been held by Republicans. What happened today, Sam?
Well, this is actually our next topic. Should we just go right into it?
Let's go right into it.
All right. Democrat Emily Gregory. She will win a special state house election in a Palm Beach district that includes President Trump's Florida home of Mar-a-Lago. Let's check out these results. I need to zoom in a little bit. There were 3 elections tonight in the state of Florida. They were all for the state of Florida.
And all seats, I believe, held by Republicans.
Yes, previously. Here we go. Here are the results. We're blocking the results, of course. All right. So there is 2 state house seats that were up for election tonight, and 1 state Senate seat that was up for election tonight. In District 55, 51, which was in Central Florida, the Republican won Hillary Hawley, 54.2% of the vote. She beat Edwin Perez, who has 45.8% of the vote.
So that's a hold for Republicans. It's
Correct.
Not a flip.
Correct. It's a hold for Republicans. And then this is the Palm Beach district that includes Mar-a-Lago, District 87. Emily Gregory, with over 95% of the vote in it, has 51.2% of the vote. John Maples, the Republican who was endorsed by Trump, has 48.8% of the vote. Emily Gregory has been projected the winner.
Don't move off that yet.
Oh, I'm not moving.
That's the one I want to talk about.
Okay, go for it, sir.
Number 1, that's the election in Mar-a-Lago, Trump's, estate and club. It's where he voted by mail.
By mail, yes.
Which he says no one should do.
Right.
And where he endorsed the Republican in a seat previously held by Republicans. So this is a massive symbolic blow. It doesn't affect the balance of power in the State House, which is more than 2/3 Republican. But you imagine right at Trump's doorstep, Sam?
Right at his door.
Right at his door.
Not steps, right at his
Right
door.
at his door. A Democrat flipping the Mar-a-Lago seat. And not by a hair, right? It's a couple of over 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a landslide, but it's not a nail biter either. It's a pretty clear win. Now, it's a off special election. It's a state house seat. But nonetheless, Trump's prestige was on the line here. This is Mar-a-Lago, his sacred ground. and his endorsed candidate lost to a Democrat. You know, as I said, in the scheme of things, in terms of the balance of power in Florida, this election doesn't mean much. But symbolically, it means a whole lot. And it's important for us to point that out.
Now, those were two state house races. Now this is a state Senate race, which was also held by a Republican. This is for Western Tampa and Hillsborough County. This one is a nail biter, Dad. There's more than 95% of the vote in. Brian Nathan, the Democrat, has 50.25% of the vote. And Josie Tomko, the Republican, has 49.75% of the vote. There's a difference of less than 1,000 votes between the two.
Yeah, I don't think you can call that one yet. I don't know when they say more. Does it say more than 95?
It says more than 95.
So it could mean 95 or it could mean 99.9.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There's no way to tell. If it's only 95, I would say the race is still up for grabs. If it's 99 or more, I'd say the race is over. But it's not knowing that.
Right.
I'm not willing to call this race.
They haven't updated it in 40 minutes.
Yeah, it may be the only ballots left are like provisional ballots.
Right.
It may be they've counted all the regular ballots. I suspect they probably have. They almost never say anything higher than more than 95, right, Sam?
I thought they usually say 99% sometimes.
Sometimes, but not right away. That's only after they've counted the provisional ballots.
Huh,
so
okay.
I'd say it's certainly likely that the Democrat will hold on, but not 100% certain. But I'm willing to call it.
No, come on. You just said you weren't.
Yes,
You're calling it?
I think about it, I don't think you can make up that difference.
You don't think
because provisional ballots lean Democratic.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to call it. You say there's 1,000 vote difference?
No, there's...
I can't read it, so...
The Democrat has 40,212 votes, and the Republican has 39,804.
Oh, so it's only 400 votes.
So it's only 400 votes, yeah.
It's not a lot of votes, but I'm still ready to call it.
You sure?
I never missed one yet.
You haven't missed one yet. This one's pretty
and
tight.
I've been way ahead of everyone else.
Let's see if the...
They haven't updated, huh?
No, they haven't updated it in 41 minutes. So, you called it, though.
I called it. You can put it in the bank.
Okay, put it in the bank. But still, I mean, if they flip
two out of 3 seats.
Yeah, that's a pretty massive win for the Dems.
And it's consistent. I do not believe in special or off-year elections that Republicans have flipped a single Democratic seat, whereas Democrats have flipped numerous Republican seats all over the country.
Right. All right. Our next topic of the evening. Are you ready, Dad?
I'm always ready.
Senate Republicans sent Democrats a new proposal to end the partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, which has led to long lines at airports in recent days and has forced many of the agency's employees to go without pay for more than a month. ICE is now stationed at many airports across the country. However, President Donald Trump did not commit to the potential compromise.
Yeah, this is typical Trump. He doesn't want to solve this. You got to understand that. He does not want to solve this. He thrives in chaos. And of course, always blames anyone but himself for the chaos. And it looked like Republicans and Democrats were reaching an agreement. And who knows, Trump can change his mind minute by minute, but it looks like he might have torpedoed the agreement. Remember, during the election campaign, Republicans and Democrats in a negotiation led by very conservative Senator Langford of Oklahoma had reached agreement on a border security and citizenship deal to secure our borders and to give certain kinds of undocumented immigrants a path to citizenship. It was all set, ready to go. Trump torpedoed it because he wanted to keep the chaos going as an important campaign issue. You got to remember that. Trump does not care about substantive policy. How long ago did he promise that he was going to have a much better health care plan, Sam, like a decade ago.
Yeah.
And what does he come up with? Concepts of a plan. He doesn't care about public policy. He only cares about politics, money, and what benefits him. And I'm very frightened about this deployment of ICE to airports. ICE has proven itself to terrorize American people, to really be out of control. It's killed at least 2 American citizens, detained others, wounded others. It's absolutely frightening. And Steve Bannon, who's former Trump chief strategist and a very important voice on the right, whose ideas often do penetrate to the White House, said this is a dress rehearsal for putting ICE at the polling places on Election Day. I don't think that's, a far-fetched.
What?
Yeah, that's kind of works too. Possibility. It's very, very scary. I got to tell you, Trump, and every one of you Republicans, heed my words. If you do that, it could well backfire on you, because Democrats tend to vote by mail and vote early. Republicans tend to vote on Election Day at the polls. So if you're going to make things more difficult for people to vote at the polls, it's by no means clear that that's going to benefit Republicans. These actions often have an unexpected counter anti-reaction.
Oh, man, sometimes you just stop suddenly. I don't know exactly when you're going to stop.
Well, that's the secret, isn't it?
That's the secret.
I don't want to be predictable.
Speaking of North Korea, which we talked about earlier in the show, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has pledged to irreversibly cement his country's status as a nuclear power while maintaining a hardline stance towards South Korea, which he called the, quote, most hostile state.
Kim Jong-un is one of the worst, most bloody, most brutal dictators we have in this world. He kills his political opponents. There's been reports that he's killed them even with anti-aircraft fire. But Trump claims, we're in love, he's flattered me, he's kissed up to me. And what has it resulted? North Korea, as this indicates, is more determined than ever. After, Trump said we're in love and, he's going to listen to me, more determined than ever to build up its nuclear forces and long-range missiles potentially capable of hitting the United States. North Korea is 10 times more of a threat to the United States than Iran. 10 times. Because they really could hit us with nuclear weapons or, very seriously damage American interests in the Far East. They're a much stronger power than Iran. And then even Iran could possibly be. And yet, Trump is in love with this murderous, thuggish dictator, and his kiss-up policies with Kim Jong-un have just backfired, have achieved the opposite of what would be in the interests of the United States. But of course, we can't attack North Korea because they have nuclear weapons. It's a loud, blaring, red light signal to Iran in terms of, in the era of Trump, what they must do.
Our final topic of the night. Kansas enacted a proof of citizenship voter registration law in 2013 that barred tens of thousands of eligible voters, and a federal court later struck it down as unconstitutional. The case is cited as a warning that the federal Save America Act, championed by President Trump, could produce similar nationwide disenfranchisement.
I'm very familiar with that case.
You are?
Yes. Secretary of State Kobach was one of the chief cheerleaders for this still repeated bogus claim about non-citizen voting. He said when he became Secretary of State and had authorization to prosecute in Kansas that the only reason there had been so few prosecutions is that my predecessors were unwilling to do so. But I pledge I will do it. And, out of millions of votes cast in Kansas, you know how many prosecutions they came up with?
None?
13, I believe.
Oh.
Just like and I'm not even sure how many of them were even convictions, but it was such a small percentage that you can't even compute it. It's less than 1,000th of 1%. As I said, a non-citizen in Kansas was more likely to be hit by lightning than to vote in a Kansas election. And yet the evidence showed tens of thousands of eligible voters were potentially struck from the voting rolls by this bogus effort to stop non-citizens from voting. And the federal judge did not mince words in shooting down the lies of Secretary Kobach and his administration and all the manipulations that he tried to pull off to try to justify his unconstitutional defiance. I would hope that if ever, and I don't think it will, a similar law passes in the United States government, it would be a tragedy for the country. And, while I'm not optimistic about the current Supreme Court striking it down, but the Kansas situation does offer a very instructive lesson to try to deal with a non-problem. You are violating the rights of, multiply it from Kansas to the whole nation. It would be millions of American citizens scrubbing their sacred right to vote to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
You had a good nickname for the SAVE Act.
Yes, I call it the Sacrifice Act.
Oh.
That we're sacrificing the rights of Americans to absolutely no end.
That's a good one. All right, with that, we will move on to our... He needs a soda.
I need my soda.
When he gives me a little tap, that means he needs a soda. Don't show the logo. You can cover it with your hand. With that, oh, that was a nice drink, huh? With that, we will move on to our question portion of the show. We have almost 1,000 people watching, but only 300 likes. Make sure you like the stream. It helps us a lot. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Turn on that notification bell so you know we're live. Remember that donations and memberships get in the queue for our question portion of the show.
Yeah, we're falling a little behind on donations, so try to help us out. Keep us going.
Our first question is a donation from our great friend, George Politis.
Oh, yeah.
They say, Professor, do you think Iran is playing Trump because Trump wants the oil reserves and he might do anything to get it? The whole present thing makes me think that maybe George is onto something here.
I think he may well be onto something. That's what he wanted in Venezuela. Couldn't have cared less who was actually governing Venezuela. It's the same political grouping that was governing it before. It's the vice president instead of the president. I don't think he cares one whit about who's actually governing Iran as long as he can get what he wants out of Iran. Remember, what do we always say when it comes to Trump, Sam?
Follow the money.
Follow the money. There's always money involved, particularly when you got Jared Kushner on the job, the ultimate bagman for money. What did he get? $2 billion from the Saudis for his investment company?
Early on, there were maybe some people, even maybe myself, I don't remember exactly, that were maybe thinking, well, maybe this could be a good thing. You could change the regime and free millions of Iranians. I think it's clear at this point that Trump has no interest in any of that at all.
Zero. Yeah, you did say that, I kind of disputed it, but I said, you're not entirely wrong. There's at least some chance of a positive outcome. He could not care less.
No, I don't think he cares.
About, the democratic movement in Iran. He stabbed them in the back in the first place. Remember, he says, I got your back. And what did he do when they started executing them? Nothing.
Right, and now he's claiming that there is regime change, even though there isn't regime change. Right. So, he doesn't seem interested in actually helping the Iranian people.
Winning means Trump can say we won.
Right.
Doesn't mean, following any of the wise precepts that are still so applicable of Sun Tzu.
If these peace talks end up failing or end up not even being real, do you think this will affect the Republicans in the midterm elections?
Oh, I absolutely think so. Sour wars sour economy always rebounds to the disadvantage of the party in power. Look to the 2008 midterm elections. In 2002, when America was still rallying around the flag for the war in Afghanistan, Republicans, even though they were the party holding the White House, did very well. 2006, rather, the midterms I'm talking about, was a disaster because they had invaded Iraq and the war in Iraq was going sour. The war in Afghanistan was still going on. The economy was beginning to show signs of trouble. And the Democrats, for the first time in many years, recaptured control of Congress, something they hadn't held since the early 1990s.
This is from member Dave ZS7UO. They say, with boots on the ground coming, do you see any way where Congress will stop Trump? First off, do you agree that boots on the ground are coming?
Who the hell knows? I don't think that's an unreasonable assumption. But with Trump, as I said, he can change his mind in a moment, much less overnight. Maybe he's just, maybe it's just a threat. Maybe he's really serious about boots on the ground. Who knows? But it's certainly a real possibility. And what was the question? Oh, will Congress stop him? Two chances.
Slim and none.
What backbone has the Republican Congress shown to this point, Sam?
I didn't even know Congress still existed.
Essentially, it doesn't. It exists on paper at this point, and that's it.
Do you think Trump underestimates others too often?
He's always underestimating others. He keeps saying, I can't believe I lost to that sleepy Joe Biden in, 2020. Vastly underestimated Joe Biden. And he certainly underestimated the resilient strength of the Democrats in the 2025 off year and in the special elections, as we just saw. A Democrat winning in Mar-a-Lago's district against a Trump-endorsed candidate. That's typical of Trump.
$5 donation from Secular Monk.
Another good buddy.
They say, since the Ukraine war, Russia and Iran have become strategic allies. Iran supplies drones to Russia. Would Russia help Iran with nuclear weapons?
Wouldn't surprise me one bit. If they want to stick it to the United States, it's probably the worst thing they can do is help Iran develop nuclear weapons. And, I don't think Putin would have the slightest compunctions about doing this. And by the way, as we've talked about so many times, Putin may be the biggest winner in this war for two reasons. One, Sam, what does their economy depend upon?
Oil.
And what's happened to the price of oil? Bing! So Putin is, laughing all the way to the bank. And secondly, with the United States preoccupied in the Middle East, what is it ignoring?
The war in Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine. So a double mitzvah for Mr. Putin.
What's a double mitzvah mean?
A blessing.
Oh, I got you.
And something I hate to see.
Right, I got you. This is from member Patrick Murray.
Oh, a great friend.
There are many reasons why Israel is so disliked by its neighbors, but personally, I think one of the key distinctions is Israel's democracy because of how different its society is. The Middle East is full of Islamic theocracies with many non-democratic norms. Why does it seem like democracy does not work in the Middle East? Even Israel's democracy is flawed.
All of those democracies is flawed for one reason. The overwhelming power of religion. Middle East, of course, is the center of religious development historically. And religion, whether it is the extremists in Israel or the extremists elsewhere, it all amounts to the same thing. I've said this many times. I don't care what the religion is. In the end, if it's extreme Islam, extreme Christianity, it comes down to basically the same thing, that you believe you're ordained by God to do whatever suits your interests. It all comes down to the same thing. Whatever your religion may be, once you take it to the extreme, you wind up in the same place.
Assuming this war keeps going into a new administration, how likely is it that a new president, assuming it's a Democrat, would end it?
Oh, I think very likely. I'd be shocked if it goes on for years, but who knows? The Afghan war went on for the longest war ever. Went on for more than a decade. So it's certainly possible this war could drag on, but I would be surprised. And yes, presuming it's a Democrat, I think they could end Donald Trump's war. Congress won't, of course, as we just talked about. Congress, as you said, Sam, does it even exist?
I don't know.
We don't know. Can't find it. It's like the Easter Bunny, you think it exists, but you can't quite find it.
They certainly exist on cable news. You see plenty of Congress people on cable news. Now, do they actually do their job, or are they cable news celebrities? That's a different question.
I think we know the answer.
Right. Assuming that SCOTUS is not going to allow the ballots to count after they are postmarked before election, or that they receive after election day, but postmarked before, do you think this is going to hurt Democrats in the long run?
Definitely it's going to hurt Democrats. From what we know, most of those ballots have been cast by Democrats. It may not be decisive because we're not talking about huge numbers of ballots, and it's not the case in every state. But as we know, elections can be decided on the knife edge. A few hundred votes could matter. So like all these other, so-called reforms, all of which are denied to make it harder to vote or have your vote count. The idea is to disadvantage Democrats. It's not even hidden. It's right out there in front. What has Trump said? If we don't do these things, Republicans will never win again.
Right.
Implying, hey, if we don't rig the elections for Republicans, they can't win in an open and fair election. Quite an admission.
Right. This is from member Diane Kastner. Trump is paying a French company $1 billion to cancel an East Coast wind farm. When Dems win in November, can they rectify this?
Way back when I published my book, The Case for Impeachment.
Right.
2017.
What? That was like an eternity
9 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a chapter saying that Trump was committing a crime against humanity because he was committing a crime against our planet. And the International Criminal Court recognizes that he is committing a crime against our planet, not only promoting the burning of fossil fuels, which is driving catastrophic climate change that threatens the well-being and survival of humanity on this planet, but he is actually acting to reverse any efforts to move towards clean and renewable energy. This is a crime against our planet and a crime against humanity. Don't take my word for it. I quoted in my book the following letter way back in 2009 sent to Barack Obama by a group of business people. It said, and I'm closely paraphrasing, unless we do something immediately to reverse catastrophic climate change, the results are going to be disastrous for humanity and the planet, and we can do so with actually improving the economy. You know who signed that, Sam, right?
The Trumps.
Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. 17 years ago.
This is a donation from Turbid TG1. A family member is afraid to criticize Trump online because he's afraid he'll lose his Social Security. Is that possible?
It shouldn't be. Your Social Security should be sacrosanct. But I don't want to tell you in the era of Trump that everything is fully secure. We know that information from Social Security, right, Sam, was taken by Elon Musk and widely disseminated. So I would never discourage anyone from speaking their mind. That has always been a hallmark of our democracy until Donald Trump. But I wouldn't promise you either there wouldn't be retaliation.
We're almost at 500 likes. Let's try to get there. This is from Retanch Hans. Professor, what are your thoughts on Rand Paul opposing Mark-Wayne Mullen's confirmation as DHS secretary? Quick note, Mullen was approved.
Confirmed. Too little, too
yeah.
late. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for Rand Paul, although
You
I
do?
disagree. Let me finish.
Oh,
Although I disagree with him on most issues, he at least is an independent voice.
mm.
And that is so rare in the Republican Party. I think a lot of the things he voices I don't agree with, but I do admire him as one of the very few genuinely independent voices, which is why no one else in the Republican Party really listens to him. And his reasons for opposing Rand Paul's reasons were very, very personal as well.
Right. I thought at first maybe he was getting too personal, but I get his point is that this guy, Mark-Wayne Mullen, is a nut, you know, and like we don't want him in such a powerful
More
position.
than that, let's be more specific.
Okay.
That this guy, like Pete Hegseth, seems to revel in violence
Right.
and doesn't have empathy for other people.
Right.
That's very dangerous when you're in charge of ICE.
More on the Rand Paul, Mark-Wayne Mullen feud. This is a $5 donation from iRobot. Another inside joke here on
Robots,
Lichtman.
yes.
Robots, yeah. Please explain the history and legality of dueling. Rand Paul told Mullen it was always illegal, but Charles Sumner's assault wasn't seriously punished. Who's Charles Sumner?
Charles Sumner was a abolitionist senator from, I believe, Massachusetts, the leader of the abolitionists in the 1850s. And he made a very strong anti-slavery speech in the mid-1850s. And he was then attacked by a rabidly pro-slavery representative from South Carolina, Preston Brooks, who attacked him with his cane and kept beating him when he was stuck in his chair in the Senate. He beat him so severely that his cane splintered, and he kept beating him with the splinter until he was finally pulled away. It was the most violent incident in the history of the Congress, and you're right, there was no punishment. There wasn't in those days.
So is Rand Paul wrong saying it was illegal? Or was it maybe technically illegal? He just...
It wasn't a duel. That's the point.
Oh.
This had nothing to do with
Dueling, okay.
And in
gotcha.
the early republic, dueling was still legal. Who was the most famous person killed in a duel, Sam?
Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton in 1804. President Andrew Jackson famously killed someone in a duel before he became president. But ultimately, the states did outlaw dueling.
Was assault illegal then? I mean, could you just hit somebody with a cane over their body?
You know, in those days, not everything was prosecuted.
Right.
That's still true today.
Right. This is from Wyatt Hamilton. Reaction to Congress members having Delta perks on flying and Delta desk to call for fast track getting on flights. I think the Congress members had some of their perks on Delta taken away because of the TSA issues.
Am I crying for these members of Congress, Sam?
I don't think you are, sir.
No, I am not.
This is from the Mad Hatter Forever. How complex were the relations between the U.S. and Napoleon's France? And how did Americans view the French Emperor and the Napoleonic Wars, especially with their strained relations with the British?
What time is it?
54.
Do we have an hour and 6 minutes?
No.
I'll try to cut this down, but it's really hard because it's so complex. There was a very complex relationship between the United States on the one hand and Britain and France, which are always engaging in wars with one another. The Federalists, led by Washington, and then when he stepped down, John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, were very pro-British and hated the French Revolution. And there was, during the Adams administration, the late 1790s, a so-called quasi-war between the United States and France, with France putting out privateers to attack American shipping. Alexander Hamilton actually advocated going to war with France. President Adams resisted. Ultimately, a treaty was signed in 1800 with France, even though they were more pro-British, ending the hostilities. And many believe that that treaty was an essential precursor to the willingness of France to sell the territory of Louisiana to the United States a few years later under the administration, the more pro-French administration of Thomas Jefferson.
Well, you're a smart guy.
Thanks. It's a 2-hour lecture in 2 minutes.
Wow. This is from Girthon 17 XD 23.
Hey, would you get that on CNN? On Fox News?
Well, I mean,
on Newsmax?
I mean, come on. They say Trump failed to do what Biden did successfully back in 2022 to build an international coalition to face against an aggressor, Russia. If he puts boots on the ground in Iran, how would the world react? We saw the German president.
I think, you'd see, they're afraid to criticize Trump. He is the most powerful person in the world. He does command this amazingly strong military. He has the strongest economy. We can understand why European and other political leaders are reluctant to criticize him. But I think we would see more and more criticism come out. And by the way, I point out it wasn't just Biden who put together a vital international coalition. It was also a Republican, Sam, George H.W. Bush, who did it in the Gulf War of 1991. And of course, how much history does Trump know?
None.
Like none. So he obviously did not take any lessons from these historical examples.
Right. This is from Rain 50D7Q. They say, Lichtman reminds me of Walter Lippmann. You know who that is?
Wow, I sure do. That's a very flattering comparison. Walter Lippmann was the leading center-left political analyst and commentary during the early 20th century, say the 1930s, 1920s in the United States. That's a very good compliment.
They also say, during a major conflict, how does Trump's leadership style compare to previous presidents in similar moments?
I think we just answered that. He didn't build an alliance. He didn't clearly develop a strategy like Sun Tzu said should be done. And he didn't explain anything clearly and persuasively to the American people. Just to cite a few examples of how he broke the mold, and not in a good way.
All right, this will be our final question of the evening. Could ICE be held criminally accountable in a future administration?
Absolutely. There is no statute of limitations on murder, but the federal government doesn't typically prosecute murder, but it could prosecute violation of civil rights. Or maybe, I'm not a lawyer, but maybe because it involves a federal agent, the federal government might have jurisdiction to prosecute here, and there's no statute of limitations on murder.
I said that was the last question, but there is one more interesting question that I wanted to pose to you. Do you recall where you were in 1979 when Iran overthrew the Shah and took American hostages? You remember that? I mean, obviously you remember that.
I remember the event.
Do you remember where you were?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I was teaching at AU at the time, most likely teaching a class, but I don't have a specific revelation like I have a very detailed recollection of everything I was doing on guess what day, Sam?
September 11th?
No. Well, yes, but even long before that.
Oh, JFK.
JFK and September 11th. I remember everything.
Right. Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the evening. I want to give some shout outs to some donators. Free Throw Guy, Philip H., Limited Light, Joanne Roberts, Mr. Shoban. Thank you so much for your donations. We had a poll going throughout the show.
What was the poll?
Do you believe Iran's peace talks are actually happening, or is something else going on here? Yes, talks are happening. No, Iran is telling the truth. something maybe behind the scenes, or we don't have enough information. 60% said no, Iran is telling the truth. 18% say something's happening behind the scenes. 14% say not enough information. Only 9% believe Trump that talks are happening.
Only 9% believe Trump was telling the truth?
Yep.
Wow.
Pretty bad for Trump there.
Typical.
All right, Dad. What are your final words to the people?
You know, at this point, we have to bear it. I understand there's a No Kings demonstration.
Yes.
This weekend.
Yes.
Is it just in Minneapolis or is it around the country?
I think it's nationwide.
Yeah. So vote with your feet. And of course, vote in elections and vote by mail, vote in advance. You know, don't let Trump and ICE intimidate you. Then he's won.
Someone said that you need a soda helmet. A little helmet with your sodas on top.
Oh.
So you can drink during the show. I think during the show you started like here and now you slowly sunk to about here. How do you feel? Oh, there you go. He's sitting up.
Yeah.
Should we get him a soda helmet? What do you think?
No.
No. Okay, no soda helmets.
I like the idea of using my own arm and hands.
Right. All right, folks. Thank you all for tuning in.
Are you doing it after?
No after show.
No after.
Good night.
Good night.